Tom drew my name for Secret Santa last year, which was really nice of him. And then he DM'd Avernus from start to finish, which was even nicer.
He got me some Spelljammer handouts, which is really cool. Check this out. This is a Nautiloid, which Mind Flayers use to propel themselves across space with telekinesis. This is a Wasp, which presumably runs on jam. I don't know, I'm not a scientist. And my favourite, Galleon. He also got me this shit. Check this out. This is Death's Ride, an adventure for AD&D. Character levels 15 to 20, which I assume is high. Wikipedia says that Lawrence Schick thinks the cover is striking, and he's right.
The cover alone makes this one of the coolest things I own. Alongside my Rainbow Rare Center Scorch VMAX is all my foil charging badges. Fuck yes, great card, thanks Connor, for the previous year's Secret Santa. So your crew shows up at the Barony of Two Lakes Vale, where a portal to the undead party time zone has been opened, producing a huge noxious cloud that hangs over the land. And the portal can only be closed by smashing a bad rock with a good hammer. So there are 6 adventuring areas, and they can theoretically be visited in any order. If you head straight to the final area without the hammer or any information, you're all dying. So it's like Curse of Strahd or Princes of the Apocalypse, just smaller. The party need information about the hammer, the portal, the cloud of shittiness, and the 3 actual villains of the adventure. And they can find all of this and more at Skullheim Castle. Oops, it's been ransacked by the undead, and all the treasure has been stolen by the dragon that might have flown overhead.
The result is a place that feels empty and a little depressing, which might be intentional. If it feels like this for your demigod players, how is it going to feel for all the peasants that are just kind of trying to live their lives? Poignant maybe, but not totally fun. You might have noticed in published adventures that dungeons often have rooms that don't have anything in them at all. I think it's to hammer home the fact that this is a functioning place. It's not just a dungeon for the sake of being a dungeon.
So you have a bathhouse with plenty of saunas, a kitchen with lots of cupboards. But is it fun to spend time investigating a room with nothing in it? I think it's funnier to have a dungeon with no toilets in it and potentially have one of your players wonder aloud where everyone who works here is supposed to shit.
My advice would be to have fewer rooms and/or have more interesting things in every one. It doesn't always have to be treasure or a trap. I just don't think you should waste space.
This person on Goodreads says Death's Ride is railroady, which by the standards of pre-written adventures past and present, I don't agree with. So few people have read this that the readers also enjoyed section is mostly unrelated stuff that I've read this year, which is really funny to me.
But the actual dungeon beneath the castle has some really cool encounters, and I would recommend just stealing them for your own campaign, because it's a lot of fun. Who was Gary Spiegel anyway? I'm going to answer that whether you asked it or not. I don't care what you want. So Gary Spiegel was a game designer with TSR before leaving in the 90s with the rest of the Dragonlance team because of massive layoffs. It's very rare to find someone on the internet who's actually talked about his D&D modules. As far as I can tell, he never did any public interviews, and he and his work have barely been mentioned anywhere. After getting the information they need, or not, sandbox for life, the players arrive at Golem Village, where a siege is going on. Undeads versus non-undeads. This will be a session of using the War Machine or mass combat rules from the companion set. There are an impressive number of things that can happen during the siege if your party just wants to roleplay instead of using the War Machine rules. I don't know how easy or fun it would be to run this chapter, but the general feeling is that your heroes have way too much to do. At any moment, they need to be in 3 places because there's so much going on. It would be rare for high-level characters to ever be in a situation this stressful, because it's not just their lives on the line, it's the lives of an entire town, and you can't fix that with a handful of diamonds. The party can just ignore the siege and go around it, but if they help out and lose the battle, then they're financially responsible for rebuilding the town. So who's going to enforce that exactly? What stops the PCs from disagreeing and then just leaving Golem forever? These are powerful characters, and this is a small town of vanilla humans. It's also possible the party just doesn't have any money. So what, is the Baron going to pursue them just to retrieve all the gold that they don't have?
I will not sleep. I will not eat. Chauncey, fetch me my vengeance horse.
But Baron, the only horse left is the chubbiest pony in the land.
That's my boy.
Actually, that sounds awesome. I want to play that game. Wikipedia's only source for Death's Ride is Lawrence Schick's Heroic Worlds. So if you see a YouTuber mention it, they've learned how to source Wikipedia's sources, which is smart. Or they pointed that out in order to seem even smarter. You know, like they're fucking Stuart Lee or something. And then it's just pointing out things over and over until the end of time. Twat!
Anyway, Heroic Worlds could be the most thorough RPG encyclopedia of all time, but it's way out of print and it hasn't been digitized legally or otherwise. The only copy you can buy online is over £500, which... fuck that. Lawrence Schick is still alive and he's the lore master for Elder Scrolls Online. I asked him if there were any other way of getting a copy of Heroic Worlds, but he didn't reply to my tweet.
However, there is a copy at the British Library in London, and it's available for reservation. So you know what?
Can't forget Tiny Metagross.
Let's give up! Fucking COVID, fucking train tickets, fuck that. But I do think it's a bit weird that Wikipedia relies so heavily on a source that's so difficult to find.
As far as I'm concerned, the book might as well not even exist. And yet it speaks such truth. At some point, the party is going to learn about the three villains, Corbandar, Wazor, and Ulslime, and will pass through several borderline nondescript villages and hamlets. The book doesn't give any information about them, but you just know that this is where your players are going to spend the most time. And if we're all being honest with ourselves, those will be the most memorable sessions, won't they? Once they've got bored of all that, they need to go into a monster-filled swamp to get both parts of the hammer.
The book says to play up the mysterious and desolate nature of the swamp, but doesn't give any examples. I think it's best to steal from Avatar: Last Airbender and Ravenloft, but what else is new? So maybe they see a mysterious figure who, when investigated, turns out to be nothing. Ooh. Maybe there are periods of absolute silence followed by very sudden noise. Spooky. Maybe they feel something on the back of their neck, and when they turn around, no one is there. Ooh. Welcome to Spooky Town, Population U. So these are all things that high-level players can't really get around. You can make them feel uneasy like this regardless of whatever spells they have. I think high-level adventures have a habit of losing the personal touch that players like at low level, and a solid atmosphere is needed for players and characters of any level.
If they survive the swamp, they'll escape with the hammer and a what? Potion of Highing! Alright, Highing. It'll go nicely next to my potion of superheating. Speaking of leaving, after leaving TSR, Gary Spiegel had an unspecified role in founding Pacesetter Limited, which as far as I can tell is not the currently operating Pacesetter Games or the YouTube channel Pacesetter. Starting with Chill, a horror RPG that you haven't heard of, the Pacesetter system was designed around making social interaction as important as combat, and cutting down on crunch as much as possible. So instead of bogging down your game with maths, your game is bogged down with navigating a series of tables, flicking back and forth through the book to figure out what it is you need to roll. So ideally, once you learned how to use the Pacesetter system, you would be able to play any flavour of game with it, including not Neil Gaiman's Sandman and Time Cop starring Dolph Lundgren. They didn't really take off. Goblinoid Games released new versions of some Pacesetter games in 2012, and you've still never heard of them. There is maybe one podcast on all of YouTube that talks about Pacesetter, and that's the Vintage RPG Podcast, and they're genuinely funny. But even they don't talk about Gary Spiegel. I'll link to them in the description, they deserve some more views.
The Adventures boss battles are a bit of a mixed bag, because it seems like in this edition, the combat system itself was considered the interesting part of the game. So as written, the encounters seem a little bit boring by modern standards. You know, there's a lot of functionally empty rooms with bosses in them. Like Corbandar is a dragon, but the book doesn't mention anything about, like, piles of treasure falling onto the adventurers, or, like, causing environmental hazards. But he does get 12 attacks. 12. Man, dragons will fuck you up.
The wizard Wazor. The wizard Wazor attacks in his stone tower, which is a big room for everyone to run around in. And then when he's defeated, the floor begins to rise into the death cloud. It seems like a wasted opportunity to me. If it happened in combat, it would raise the stakes. And Ulslime the Cleric throws a dragon golem or drolem at the party just before they go into the final temple. The interesting part is that he looks exactly like Corbandar, so hopefully your players will be really confused that a previous boss is coming back to get them. It's pretty cool, I really like it. And the last boss is an absolute clusterfuck with whatever a drudge is. There are 3, and then each of them split into 4 parts. It seems like a bit of an anticlimax to have an encounter that is difficult to run and a slog for players. The Drolem should be the last encounter inside the temple. It's a much cooler monster.
Nobody knows who Gary Spiegel is, except Lawrence Schick. Or rather, Lawrence Schick in 1985, but Lawrence Schick in 1985 did not reply to my tweet. Like, where are the sources? Where is the information? Why can't I find out anything about this man? Honestly, the adventure shines in its little details. There are some really weird things to encounter, like the cockatrice that turns into a woman when it dies, and then back into a cockatrice when it gets resurrected. There's a giant who throws a basket of snakes at the party, but my favourite thing about the adventure is probably the Mirror of Life Saving. If you're attuned to it and you die, your soul is trapped in the mirror, and you can only free the soul that's trapped in there by casting Dispel Magic at 20th level, or spending 2 seconds of effort by smashing it. That's amazing game design. And when someone casts Detect Magic on it, the face of the trapped soul shows in the mirror. More magic items need to react to Detect Magic in cool ways. I think all books are mirrors of life saving, really. Okay, stick with me on this. Even if it's small, there's a piece of the author trapped in there forever. And you see their face every time you read it. When they die, there's something left of them somewhere. And if you believe that, then Heroic Worlds is a phylactery of hundreds of souls. That might be why it's so difficult to find. I'm onto you, Lawrence. It's weird, but there are some things that the internet just does not know. For all I know, Gary Spiegel didn't want to be famous or talked about in an obscure YouTube video. Maybe Death's Ride works not only as a piece of collaborative storytelling, but as a statement of where the author was at that time of his life. Or maybe not. Both of those are valid. I need to accept that. Thanks, Tom!